As Sylvester walked away, I was quickly approached, first and foremost by Renee. "You did a great job," Renee shouted. "There's no question now that you've established yourself as a strong wolf, not to be trifled with or taken lightly. And not only that, but you also proved that you're intelligent, not one to be made a fool of easily. I'm very proud, Victor. I think you handled yourself well," Renee said as she clasped her arm around mine. "I would have to agree," I heard announced from nearby as her father approached, right behind her. "You handled yourself well. You made intelligent decisions and reasoned them out. And you fought with the best of them, even given your limited experience as a wolf. I think that you're going to do quite well here," Renee's father said with a slight smile, as most of the rest of the people in the audience began to gather as well, approaching me to compliment me on my combat with Sylvester, telling me they can't believe how strong I am, that they're happy to have me in the pack. One compliment after another from basically everyone. Some complimenting me on the way my form looks, saying that they've never seen anything like it. Others complimenting me on my fighting. Others still complimenting me on my intelligence. It actually felt pretty good. Everyone seemed to be accepting me. Not just that, everyone seemed to be quite fond of me, in fact. I thought there might be a little bit more challenge, so to speak. But so far, aside from Sylvester, who I had to fight to gain approval from, no one else seemed to be taking me quite well. And myself and Renee spent the rest of the night mingling with the other guests, getting to know the other members of the pack. The girl who ended up being a werewolf, the one that worked at the fast food restaurant nearby, actually told me that she couldn't believe that I was a werewolf too, that it blew her mind, and that she remembered me coming into the shop on multiple occasions with my friends, and never would have suspected that I was part of the lost bloodline, even going so far as to offer me free refreshments whenever I came in. Actually, I started to notice that the women were getting very chummy. A lot of the men seemed to congratulate me and then make their distance, seeming to still have some amount of intimidation of me, still not wanting to be a bother. The women, on the other hand, seemed to try to hang around much longer. That was until Renee started casting them dirty looks, at which point they started exhibiting the same types of behaviors as the men. It was at that point that I surmised that they were getting a good whiff of Renee's scent, and her anger towards them for, lingering, and were most likely intimidated off, going about their regular business, as to not upset Renee. Afterwards, we continued to have fun for a while. Me and Renee talked and danced. There was lively music, as some of the people there played instruments, and usually brought them to gatherings. Created sort of a makeshift band out of the members of the pack. Despite the fact that they were makeshift, they were actually pretty good. And they could play a number of my favorites. So, all in all, I think we had a good time. But eventually, the night dragged on, and I eventually had to make my way home. Renee, of course, dropped me off, giving me a gentle kiss on the cheek as I exited the car, heading back towards my house. My mom and dad were once again working late, so they weren't home when I got there. I really should tell them that I'm going to be dropping out of karate and martial arts training of any kind. It'll definitely help their finances. Money is pretty tight in my family, so every penny that they don't have to spend could really help. And seeing as I don't want to accidentally kill anyone, going to regular martial arts training isn't really going to be an option. And I doubt that Renee's dad is going to charge me for instruction under him. And since he knows just about every martial arts style there is, I'm getting the strong suspicion that I'll be able to bankroll that for quite a while. There's no doubt that once I get finished training under his specific style, and master that I'll have plenty of time in my extra long werewolf lifespan to start learning all the other martial arts styles that he knows. Or at least that's what I thought to myself as I made my way up to my room and crashed out on my bed, feeling pretty tired from the day. The weekend was exhausting. Turning into a werewolf, having to learn about werewolf society, just one stressful thing after another. I was glad that I was actually able to unwind a bit today. Have some fun. But tomorrow it's back to the regular grind. Or at least part of the regular grind, going back to school. And after that, I've got more training and learning scheduled with Renee and her dad. Renee said that there's still plenty more that I have to learn about werewolves in society and history. And her father is quite adamant that I begin training under his style again as soon as possible. So, after school, I'll probably have to split time between learning from Renee and practicing with her father. I'm gonna have some seriously cramped time schedules coming up, I thought to myself as I laid back, closing my eyes and trying to get some sleep. After I finally managed to get some shut-eye, I once again found myself in a dream. What seemed to be a dream. As I looked, I was at the park. I was at the park with Renee. It was the night that I became a werewolf. It was just like when I was actually there. The events rushing back. There Renee was on top of me, and we were getting, well, intense. And suddenly, I felt a powerful, overwhelming sensation. One that, as I recalled it in the dream, now felt familiar as the transformation itself. As I transformed, Renee scattered off of me. She looked scared and angry as I changed, glaring me daggers as I now dwarfed her in physical size. And in no time at all, Renee had transformed, beginning to run off in a different direction. As I recalled this, what was passing through me weren't really thoughts. It was more like a set of flowing emotions, mixed with impulses. They almost seemed to be their own sort of language. As Renee skittered off, the language that seemed to pass through my head of feelings and instincts basically gave me the idea that I felt bad. For whatever reason, I felt sad that Renee was running away. She was leaving and quickly gave chase. I was seeing through my own eyes as I leaped from rooftop to rooftop, back alley to back alley, running in a rapid dash, jumping from place to place, sometimes even getting ahead of Renee. It seemed as if I was trying to make sure she could see me, and seemed confused that she didn't, wondering why she didn't recognize me. And as she didn't recognize me, Again, I felt that sensation, like sadness, disappointment, but continued to follow her all the same, until eventually she exited the city, going out into the woods, where I, of course, followed. There in the brush and the tall trees of the forest outside of Black Rock Falls, I was finally able to get in close, jumping through the trees with an amazing amount of dexterity, which the strangest part of felt as if it was natural, as if I was at home in the trees. The tall forest that stands outside of Black Rock Falls, and with a massive leap, ended up right there in front of Renee, still in her wolven form. Renee tried to speak to me at that point, and obviously I could understand what she was saying, or at least I can, as I'm remembering it, asking me why I lied to her, what I was after. But at the time, the me I was then didn't seem to recall anything or understand anything. The words she spoke didn't seem to have any meaning. All I seemed to be able to grasp was the emotional context, how Renee was feeling as she spoke them. I knew that Renee was angry. I understood who Renee was on some level. I couldn't remember her name, but something about Renee made me believe that she was mine. The feeling that one gets when you're close to someone important to you, like love or affection. So as she was angry at me, I could only surmise that she was angry and not really understand why. But I do remember having a very specific sense looking at her in her werewolf form, a feeling of seeing something truly beautiful, as I again and again tried to approach her. At first, she seemed very reluctant, which also sort of seemed to hurt my werewolf feelings in the moment, as I couldn't really understand why. Once again, for whatever reason, I expected Renee to recognize me. Why, I have no earthly idea, but I expected her to know who I was, and I had the sense that I knew who she was, and all of that just seems to not fit, since I couldn't really seem to grasp anything else. But eventually, Renee finally dropped her guard, realizing that I wasn't myself. And when she did, there was a change. She finally started allowing me to get close, make contact with her. Suddenly, I was overcome with a sense of joy, belonging, as I nestled against her werewolf form, embracing her there in the woods. After which, it seemed like I began to act differently. After Renee stopped behaving like she was angry, began to accept me, suddenly I was much more like a playful dog, and began trying to play with her, jumping around, nuzzling her here and there, up and nuzzling her slightly, then running away. It felt as if my intentions were to get her to chase, as if it were a game. Eventually, Renee seemed to get it, chasing after me, and for a short time, we stayed like that, playfully running around the woods. Eventually, we reached a cliff, an edge of jagged rock, still of course covered with trees, but the rock itself was large enough to protrude outward. And sitting on top of it, one could clearly see the full moon, hanging large and bright in the sky above. Here outside of the city, the skyline no longer dimmed by light pollution. It was very beautiful. It felt peaceful. I could feel the breeze sweeping in over the cliff, rushing in from the ocean. Smell salt in the air. And there Renee was, perched on the cliff right alongside me, watching me sniff and smell the breeze, feel it at the very edge of the cliff as it rustled through my fur, all the while smiling at me, simply sitting there happily, as if she was content in the moment. And once again, as I looked towards her, I felt that sensation again, the sensation of being at peace, of being loved, of finding one's place. Once again, I approached Renee, nuzzling against her, which she gladly reciprocated. She was still trying to talk to me in English. I didn't understand what she was saying, but I could feel the emotional context.
You know, I kind of like you like this,
Renee said, looking at me with a somewhat adoring expression in her wolf form.
You're very playful when you're like this. Something that is normal. Well, at least not normal for you, Victor,
She said as she reached out, calmly and lovingly stroking the fur on the side of my face and head, rubbing behind my ears a bit.
You're quite handsome as a wolf, you know that? But you don't understand a word I'm saying, do you, Victor? It's actually astonishing that you recognize me at all.
She said, looking into my eyes.
I've never heard of a werewolf transforming and then being friendly with anyone, even their own family members. So, is something different about you, Victor? Or is it that there's something different about us? I was actually planning on turning you into a werewolf tonight. I thought for sure that you'd be handsome with long black fur, and yet here you go completely surprising me, and turning into a werewolf all on your own. And even then, you recognize me, don't you, Victor?
She said as she gazed into my eyes, still lovingly stroking me. It was at that point that I began to press my head into her fur, rubbing against her, before circling around, wrapping my arms, legs, and my long tail, as I was still larger than her, around her form gently, holding her tight to my body, as the side of my face rubbed against the side of hers, cradled there in my arms on that cliff top. And then a set of emotions flowed through me, very powerful ones. Once again, that sense of belonging, and love, affection, and also a desire to be with her. And as I felt that flow of emotions, I could also hear myself letting out some kind of low bass pitch howl. And not the kind that a wolf puts off when they howl at the moon. No, it was much softer than that. Almost like some sort of mix between a howl and a growl, but there was no aggression in it. It was very bassy, so much so that I'm sure that there were vibrations in my chest from it. I could feel them. And as I completed that very low bass howl, there was a light that appeared on Renee's shoulder with a symbol on it. And as it did, I simply nuzzled against her. Renee saw it. For a moment, she was taken back.
But how?
Renee said, staring at the mark that had appeared on her shoulder, before turning her head around back up to look at me, right behind her, simply gazing down at her lovingly. It was at that point that I could sense that I had asked her something. That much I understood. I understood that I asked her to be with me, to be mine. And as she looked back up at me, first with a look of surprise and astonishment, and then with joy, as she reached her arms up over the top of my head, pulling me down, so that my head was right next to hers, and nuzzling me heavily, rubbing against me firmly. It was at that point that I felt something wet, the feeling of tears. Renee was crying, and yet she had a smile on her face, one that gave me a great deal of comfort, warmth.
Yes,
Renee replied, as she nuzzled against me heavily.
of course I will, Victor. I'll stay with you forever.
And as she said the words, I felt an overwhelming amount of warmth flow through me, as I saw a shadowy aura pick up around her, and a silvery one around me. And just like that, a symbol began to appear on my chest as well, as we cradled each other there on the cliff top. It was at that point that I woke up to the sound of my alarm blaring in my ears. Word to the wise, if you have super hearing, you need to get a much quieter alarm clock. I felt like I was gonna go deaf, it was so loud. Without even thinking about it, I reached over and smashed it. One fist, that's all it took. The entire thing was in pieces. And all I could do was look at the shattered bits and think, I'm gonna have to buy a new one now. And there goes half my allowance. Great move. Well, looks like you're starting the day off with a bang, huh, Victor? I said to myself, finally curling out of bed.